topped the NITI Aayog's Export Preparedness Index 2020, followed by Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu in the second and third place respectively, according to the government think tank's report released last week. According to the report, 6 of 8 coastal states feature in the top 10 rankings, indicating the presence of strong enabling and facilitating factors to promote exports. Among the landlocked states, Rajasthan has performed the best, followed by Telangana and Haryana. Among the Himalayan states, Uttarakhand topped the chart, followed by Tripura and Himachal Pradesh. The report said, adding that across union territories, Delhi has performed the best, followed by Goa and Chandigarh. The report noted that Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand are 2 landlocked states that had initiated several measures to promote exports. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the Export Preparedness Index 2020. Joining me on the program today are Dilip Chinoy, Secretary General FICCI, Jayan Dasgupta, former Ambassador of India at the WTO, and Pankuri Dutt, Public Policy Consultant, NITI Aayog. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, Pankuri, let me begin the program with you first. Let's understand the parameters and understand the report in a better manner and in a better way. Take us through it.
So this is an initiative where we have tried to rank the states in terms of their export preparedness, that as in like how well can they perform, how well do they perform when they're exporting goods. And there are 4 pillars in this index, and they have 11 sub pillars. Now we have tried to put in a lot of parameters to evaluate states. So it includes infrastructure, it includes access to finance, it includes transport, it includes policy preparedness. So, you know, there's a range of pillars that have been used to evaluate the states. And as you have already mentioned, you know, Maharashtra, Gujarat, like a lot of the coastal states were on top. But obviously there is a lot of history to their, them topping the index. But at the same time, there have been a lot of policy changes and a lot of improvements, like, you know, a lot of been policy inclusions that have actually supported the growth of these states in the in export preparedness at the same time. And what the report also does is that it ranks India's export preparedness as a whole, and it also compares, categorizes states in 4 different categories, and then again ranks them as well, because there are proximity to a coastal area or proximity to a port, etc., often affects the trade capability of a state. So all that has been accounted for. And again, you know, you've already discussed the results, and it kind of reflects what we had expected.
Okay. So basically the results are on expected lines is what Pankuri Dutt is suggesting. So Jayan Dasgupta, let me come across to you now, and like, you know, has already been pointed out, you know, exports at the end of the day, there are several factors that determine why particular states do well. Like, you know, the coastal states are doing better than the others, probably because of accessibility to the port and other such factors. But as a whole, what is the export environment like?
There are several things which this report has focused on. Amongst them, the 4 major pillars. The first one is about the policy, about the existing policy framework and the institutional framework which supports exports. That has a weight of about 20% in the index. The largest weight is of the business ecosystem, and that includes various factors, including transport connectivity, including infrastructure, general infrastructure. The access to finance is also there. So there are, and then of course the other 2 pillars out of the 4 are the export ecosystem, which includes the export infrastructure and 2 other factors. And the final one is about export diversification and what kind of growth has the state been showing in the recent past in terms of export. So all these factors have been taken to construct the index. Now, as far as the coastal states are concerned, there is a mix of good policy, because out of the 8 states, coastal states, 6 of them figure in the top 10. So that is indicative of the fact that they have scored well in the first 2 pillars, at least, the policy framework and the business ecosystem. I wanted to mention one thing, that against an index of 100 maximum, The country's index has only been an average of 39, in which the first two pillars, which is the policy framework and the business ecosystem, have done reasonably well in many states. And where it has lagged behind is in the export ecosystem and in the export performance. The R&D support, for instance, the diversification, these are some of the things in which we have not fared well. And in trade finance, the availability has been just 0.6%, which is fairly low. And it goes only up to a maximum of about, I think, 6.5% in the best states. So there are several factors. Now, I take the point and I support it, which Pankuri has mentioned, that most of these coastal states have already taken the lead about 20, 30 years ago. They are highly industrialized. They have diversified to a great extent, and they also have access to ports and airports for exports. So it has helped them, but that would take away the fact that they have also taken initiatives in various aspects. One is, of course, in the policy framework, in the business ecosystem, in terms of making ease of doing business much better than in let's say, the states which are lagging behind. So, and of course, the final point is that the enabling environment overall, that there is less interference in terms of the bureaucracy, in terms of providing facilitation rather than interference. That, I think, has been noted through the index.
Okay. Points taken. Let me take the points that you're making forward now and go to Dilip Chinoy. You know, as far as export preparedness on the whole is concerned, how prepared are we? How do exports fall into the scheme of things as far as our Atmanirbhar mission is concerned, and what is it that we need to do?
If you look at the export basket, exports are a critical aspect of the development of any economy. If you look at this report itself, it talks about those economies or those states that are performing well on the trade front are actually performing much better on the competitors front. They're adding more value, they're growing faster, and actually, 50% of the exports are limited to a very few states, as pointed out by the report. So if you look at the current scenario, and if you look at the evolution of exports, so the government, as is pointed out in different parts of the report, they did the review of the export policy. They have launched the agricultural export policy. For the first time, this time the Prime Minister talked about Make in India for the world. So, how do you actually look at making India for the world? And if we have to actually compete, and given the current geopolitical situation, and when people are looking for an alternate supply chain and alternate value chains, I think India has to actually take advantage of this going forward. And in that context, this report is very, very critical for two reasons. First, it actually ranks the states in order of their, different, pillars, as they call it, or sub-pillars in the report, and it goes in very, very deep. And what is surprising, and there are many, many interesting nuggets in the report, which could actually act and serve as a best practice for the other states. So, for example, the export finance, West Bengal is singled out at 2% as one of the leaders. So could other states actually follow it? In creating growth and creating drivers, Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh are there. So do other states actually follow it? If you look at other aspects, and who would have thought that on an all India ranking, Mizoram would be number one in a particular something. You think that the northeast states are, and if you look at the text, Manipur also figures in because of the medicinal plants, because of bamboo, because of other initiatives that they have taken. So I think for a country point of view, it is very important. The second thing in the report is that the three areas that I think even Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta also focused on, whether it is export infrastructure, trade support, and innovation. If we look at this and say, what could the states, and they're very, very simple things. The report talks about that most of the states don't even have a trade promotion website, or they don't have any things to promote exports from their states. They're very interesting things that could actually, this report could be used for and actually promote exports from different states. And if each state takes the learning and applies it, it will be very valuable. The worrying area really is on the export infrastructure, because on infrastructure where you have a different, in fact, there are three sub things. There's infrastructure, there is transport, and there's export infrastructure. So, if you look at it in that context, we have to really look at promoting the export infrastructure as we go forward. The state policy reforms, and I think this is a very key point. The NITI Aayog is actually promoting cooperative and competitive federalism, if I were to use the new term that is actually being coined. And how do you get different elements of what different states are doing well? But the next set of policy reforms in the exports, to a significant extent, will have to be at the state level. And therefore, this report has come out at very appropriate time and serves as a good beacon for all the states to actually look up. Very interestingly, over the weekend, we had the new industrial policy of Gujarat being launched, right? And they have a very interesting focus on exports. And you yourself, when you were introducing, you said Gujarat topped the index for this case. So I think if every state looks at it and looks at how they can take the best from this other states, how they can actually employ it in their state, support the activity, I think you can transform exports from this country as a whole. Because no matter what the center does, unless the states work in partnership and in support of each other, we won't see any significant growth or diversification in the export basket.
Absolutely. All right. Pankuri, taking the points that Dilip Chinoy is making forward about, what are some of the best practices that some of the, non-performers can take forward. I think the report also talks about how well Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh are doing and how it is a lesson really for some of the states to learn from them and take some of the best practices forward. What is it that is working for states like Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, and what is it that the other non-performing states can actually take away?
What I can say is that sometimes you just have to be cognizant of what your capabilities are. You cannot just suddenly become a trade champion by trying to emulate another state which is doing something. Like, a state has its own competencies and you should focus on that. So if you are lacking in transportation and just solving that problem can help improve your competitiveness, do that. If your access to finance is a problem, then you should be focusing on that. If your export you're not as diversified, then maybe you should try and specialize, or if you think you have the capability to diversify, you should be doing that. So what the report tries to do is that it has actually listed every single state on all the different parameters, and it allows the states to look at its performance individually on every sub pillar and then judge where it stands and what it can do to improve. So I don't want to recommend that there is no one solution that is a problem to all answers when it comes to trade. What works, what worked for Gujarat, a lot of things have to happen together. And have to happen, in tandem for trade to work out. So it's actually a long-term policy. It's not a short-term policy.
Right. So, Ambassador Dasgupta, let's look at this. Let's bring in another aspect as well and look at the bigger picture. Let's not forget that we are in the midst of the pandemic, and it has had a massive impact not just on the Indian economy but on the global economy as well. Considering what the global economy is going through, what is the status of exports right now? What is it that we need to be focusing on in the immediate near future to give a fillip to our export sector?
Our exports, of course, have gone down very radically in the first 3 months of the financial year, but that is to be expected. What is more alarming is that the World Trade Organization has projected that the exports will go down during the year by between 13 to 32%. and the lower limit seems to be the one towards which trade is veering to. So if there is a general contraction of not only the GDP of nations, but of trade, India is also going to get affected badly by that. That is the first point. The second point is that what India, if you look back over the past 5-6 years, we have been hovering around, let's say, between $270 billion to a maximum of $330 billion. So effectively speaking, we haven't had much growth. Of course, if you compare only the last 2-3 years, then you can show that there has been some growth, but taking a longer view, we haven't had much growth. The third point is that if we keep doing the same thing and focusing only on labor-intensive industries and low value addition, we are not going to go much ahead. We are going to stagnate, and then we are going to start sliding backward. So the two things which, to my mind, which India should focus on are first innovation and research. Two, product diversification, which is based on innovation and research, and looking at not only new products but new markets, and to then consolidate its whole. These are the things, and then of course enabling policies, trade finance, infrastructure, improving the business environment, trade guide, as Dilip mentioned just a while ago. These are some of the other things. Now, one of the things which the report has highlighted is that there is a scheme called the Trade Infrastructure for Export Scheme, CIES. Only 9 states have submitted or have got their projects approved for export infrastructure improvement. Now, that is something which is lacking in most of the states, to a lesser extent perhaps in the coastal states, but to a much greater extent in the landlocked states and the Himalayan states. So that needs to be taken care of on priority basis. And these are some of the things which come to mind readily. And of course, the final point that I wanted to make is that this is going to make the states aware of where they stand vis-a-vis other states, vis-a-vis the best performing states, and it not only provides an avenue for them to try to improve their own performance, they can also adopt the best practices in other states and improve. So I would expect the NITI Aayog to come out with a best practices manual for various indicators and the sub-pillars, 11 sub-pillars, so that the states can have that ready to hand and they can start acting on it. The final point, I'm sorry, I wanted to mention this, is that there is a problem with data. So we haven't had the services sector covered in this index. And as you know, we have about $215 billion worth of exports in services in the last year, as compared to $315 or $20 billion of merchandise exports. So services exports from India have a huge potential, and they are growing very fast. So we have to have an export performance index for services also as soon as possible, to point out our deficiencies and to enable the states to overcome those deficiencies and have enabling policies.
Okay. Dilip Sinha, I'm just going to come to you in a bit. Let Pankuri respond to what the Jain Das Gupta has just said. A couple of points. One, of course, a best practices manual is what he's talking about, so that, something that the states can go back to and look at, and also an index for the services sector.
So about the best practices, I see the need, but there is also immense literature available globally, mapping countries, which shows how countries have progressed. And the decentralization structure that India follows kind of slightly limits the capacity of states to just go all out in becoming a trade champion. So I understand that there is a best practice need, and there are good practices which can actually help improve your competitiveness. And this report was actually an effort in that direction itself, so that the states like we have something documented for the first time where we are saying that, look, this is where each state stands, and there's always room for improvement. And when it comes to services, yes, I also agree that eventually I'm sure that India has competency in services, and that is something we would also like mapped. So in the long run, that is something we should definitely include in the report as well, because that is a strength area for us. So I humbly accept Mr. Dasgupta's points.
Okay. All right. Then going forward, Dilip Shana, as far as the industry is concerned, what is it that the industry is looking for from the government in terms of better policies, maybe in terms of some kind of hand holding to ensure that, exports are boosted?
So if you look at the current scenario, we are in a huge transition phase as far as export goes. As Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta actually mentioned, he talked about the minus 32% WTO, or even the report quotes UNCTAD saying that it's going to decline by $50 billion this year. So there's going to be a decline in exports. Given that fact, in addition to that, there were many schemes that the government was using, for example, the MEIS scheme and others, which have been found we need to change because they're not WTO compatible. So we need to, actually go into a new kind of type. So the second transition that is happening. Third is that a lot of the, import-dependent export items from India are facing a supply chain kind of a challenge. And fourth, because the imports are actually declining, the availability of containers is a big issue. You don't have export infrastructure actually to get them out. So there is an immediate term kind of requirement to actually quickly put in place and announce and expand the full thing of reimbursement of locally embedded taxes. The second one is the report also points out about the need for enhancing the export insurance and guarantee coverage. The third thing the report also talks about is increasing access to finance for exports. And then how do you actually enable? How do you just change the whole dynamic so that you can prioritize the types of containers for exports going forward? The agricultural exports is a big opportunity, and although there was an agricultural export policy announced, the report does mention it, but over the last 1.5 years, you could not actually execute it because the back-ended reforms about APMC and the Essential Commodities Act and all that were not in place. Now, with that coming in place during as part of the Atmanirbhar package, if the states execute that, then we could actually, and given the fact that there's a huge agricultural surplus kind of, in the horizon because of the greater sowing, etc. here, we need as a nation to actually ensure that we can target select markets and give imports. For example, the US, I don't know if you're following in the newspapers and media, they've started a generic advertising on American pistachios. They've started a generic advertising on Canberry. So I think as a country, we need to actually take this forward and then go out, because if there's a surplus of agricultural commodities remain in India, then the prices are going to drop, and that's going to create a whole set of other problems in the economy as we go forward. So there is, and most of the things about here is, I think power is also there, although the report doesn't really talk about the power costs, because the power is, especially for if you want to go into machinery and you want to diversify, as Ambassador Dasgupta talked about, from the typical, textiles, apparel, leather kind of, and gems and jewelry kind of thing. If you go into machinery and value-added products, you need to look at that. Similarly, for steel, if you want to go, you need aluminium, you need to address the power thing. So there are a lot of things. The government is looking at it. And we believe that in the next few days, you're going to see some activity happening there. But there is an agenda. But more importantly, I think whatever the center does, the state has to support it. If each state follows the West Bengal and the other example of giving you interest subvention and export finance, if they look at the Gujarat model of looking at reimbursement of electricity duty and other things that they are doing, then a combined state and center effort will be exponentially more powerful than either a state or a center individual thing together. So I think cooperative federalism has to come out in its full strength, taking the best out of the competitive positions and overall enhancing the competitiveness of India. And that will really be the true value of this report.
Absolutely. All right, time now to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Ambassador Dasgupta.
One of the points which I wanted to mention is that the slogan of Atmanirbhar Bharat has been misconstrued by certain sections by taking it in the light of protectionism and import substitution only. That is not the intention of raising this slogan. It is about making India globally competitive. And that is where the emphasis should lie. We have to innovate, we have to put in money on research and development, on improving our infrastructure and raising productivity by skill development across the board. And that is how we are going to become globally competitive. So that all these things taken together, I think the final point is about the production linked incentive scheme, which Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog has also mentioned. That is something which we have to do. We have to pick up a few sectors where we have the financial resources, help them in setting up an industry which is world class, and then give them the benefit of the huge domestic market and enable them to use that as a springboard to venture into the outside world and make good exports possible. So that is the way to go. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, Pankuri.
I would just add to what Mr. Dasgupta is saying, that there are synergies involved in, when states work together. And again, Mr. Shenoy also mentioned cooperative federalism is the way to go. We have to be part of the global value chain. For that, we need to make sure that our states work well together. So if there is an agricultural commodity which is an input to a trade, an exporting commodity, we need to make sure that within the country, our states are supporting each other and growing at the same time. So you cannot just exclude one state and look at it. You have to look at the broader picture. You have to make sure India as a country is growing, is becoming an export champion. So this report was a step in the right direction, and the more openness and the more visibility our states are getting in their performances, I think the more the competition is going to get healthier and there'll be more cooperation in future.
Absolutely. All right. And Dilip Chenoy, close the show for us with your quick concluding remarks.
So just 2 points. One, we have to actually promote scale. There are many items where we have an export potential, but we don't have the capability to give scale, including a lot of handicrafts and handloom products. If they want 1,000, we can give it. If they want 1 million, we can't. So we need to actually look at promoting scale. That is very, very important. The second thing what we need to do as a country is to promote value addition. Let's not export shrimps to Vietnam, who repackage it, take a greater share of value and export it there and get a greater point. If you look at the 2 charts in the report, the comparison of growth of exports from Vietnam and India and the data on Bangladesh, it is very, very involvement. So create scale, get greater value addition in the country, and do everything what this report talks about. And I think we are on a nice journey going ahead.
All right. On that note, then, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that the index is on expected lines and doesn't throw up surprises. The states that have done well have been working on improving the export ecosystem for several years now. Export infrastructure is the only worrying sign. We have to promote and improve our export infrastructure. States that are doing poorly can learn from the better performing states and take the best practices forward. There is no one-fit-all solution to exports. We need to focus on the strengths and try and diversify, understand where we are lagging behind and then work on it. whatever the center does, the states